The first thing I want to say, and I'm going to make this really fast because I really want to get to the panel people, I don't think there's anything more important to community growth and engagement and youth development than core work. I think it's a panacea for so many different challenges and problems that we're facing in our cities and our parks and that kind of thing. So that's where my starting place is. I think if we're going to be serious about youth development and if we're going to be serious about community engagement, I think the place we start is with core work. So thank you for that. All right, so am I good? Okay, all right. So I don't know you. So let's start with you.
Sounds good.
I know these guys. Who are you?
I'm Ray Bivens. I'm the director of Delaware State Parks.
And how long have you been director of Delaware State Parks?
7 years as director and 17 with parks altogether.
Really? Who was director before you?
Chaz.
I knew him.
Yes.
Yeah.
You spoke at our park school.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, absolutely.
I did. Okay, so you're doing work with cores. Well, first of all, let's do this. Let's meet everybody. Okay, this is Dan Puskar. I want you to say something about who you are. But when I was at the National Park Service, Dan Puskar was one of my therapists. And I needed therapy on a regular basis, and so Dan was with the National Park Foundation and was one of my therapists. So Dan, talk to us a little bit about what you did.
Was I successful?
It's a work in progress.
It's a work. Great to be with all of you. Yes, Dan Puskar. I've been with the Public Lands Alliance now for about 6 years. Our organization represents a broad array of nonprofit partners of America's public lands, whether they're partnering with the National Park Service, Forest Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, BLM, state parks as well. It's the friends groups, the cooperating associations, it's the cores. Everything from the Student Conservation Association all the way to, say, the Rocky Mountain Conservancy that fields its own core work in the Rocky Mountains. But without question, the most important thing you need to know about me is that when I'm not doing this, I am a flying trapeze instructor. That is not a joke. We have a wonderful school here in Southeast DC. You should come check it out. It means I am regularly flying 25 feet above the air trying to catch people in midair, which makes dealing with Mickey Fearn really easy by comparison. And that's why I want you to know that.
Now, how can anybody take you seriously now? Now they're thinking about you flying through the air. They're not thinking of it. All right, we'll get to it. All right. Catherine Nagel is the executive director of the City Park Alliance, of which I'm on the board, and I've been on the board for several years. So, Catherine, why don't you say a little bit about the City Park Alliance and what you do?
Sure. So we are the National Urban Parks Advocacy Organization based here in DC, and our members are public, urban, park and recreation departments. They're nonprofit park partners. We have funders, we have designers and planners, we have representatives from the private sector. And what we're trying to do collectively is to increase investment in our nation's urban parks and to have them recognized as a vital part of our national infrastructure.
And how many members?
We have over 300, about 350 members, mostly organizational.
So in Catherine just applied for a sabbatical because she's been doing this work for how many years?
16.
Unbelievable work. But we're having people follow her around in case she's talking to other agencies or she's going to interview with anybody. We're going to have people following you around so that we don't lose you. But Catherine has done unbelievable work for the City Park Alliance and is connecting the City Park Alliance with the National Recreation and Park Association, so we're finding synergy between those organizations. So I'm going to go back to Ray. All right, you recently done some stuff with cores that's gotten some recognition, I think. So why don't you tell us what Delaware State Parks does with cores?
So like Rosie, I'm an alumni of an MCC. It's not the Montana Conservation Corps, but I'm actually a Maryland Conservation Corps member. And when I came in as director, it was a priority for me to try to do more. So we started a Youth Conservation Corps. I have Layla and Karen, two of my staff members here, representing us, and Glenn somewhere, as well as a Vet Conservation Corps. And in the work that we do, it's becoming more and more specialized, and we're having a harder and harder time filling jobs, which I heard a little bit earlier. And we have a wealth of people that have knowledge that want to pass it on. And we've seen just one of the favorite things about my job is seeing whether it's our Vet Corps, our YCC, or past AmeriCorps grants, seeing people end up in careers in state parks. And I guess I'm here to represent state parks nationally. I think it's surprising, David Vela just left, but if you combine our reach of state parks nationally, we crush the National Park Service when it comes to visitation. And just to give you an idea, you know, our parks are truly under attack in a good way. More and more visitors every year. Our camping just in Delaware in the last 4 years is up 39%. You know, these are parks that were designed in the 60s and 70s. So you can imagine that infrastructure, how a camper from the 60s and 70s has changed today's campers with slide outs and length and everything else. And visitors have different expectations. So it's important that we keep our parks modern. You know, we have a huge capital backlog as well, $160 million just in little old Delaware. And those crews are Vet Conservation Corps. They're working side by side with our historic mason. They're working with our forester. They're working on our trails crew. And they're learning great skills, which makes them very marketable. We heard Rosie say that earlier.
So when I was at the National Park Service, people said, we got plenty of visitors. You know, the parks are being loved to death, yet there are certain people who aren't coming, right? There are certain populations of people who don't come. How do you address the issue that there is a carrying capacity and too many people can come, but at the same time there are populations of people who are not benefiting from a relationship with the natural world or interest in outdoor parks and recreation. So how do you react to that?
So we're a little different than some of the different state park system and national parks. We're also the close to home kind of system. And our park system is very unique. We have a zoo. We have more historic structures than anyone else. We do see different user patterns, and I'm glad to see we're seeing a huge change in swing in some of those. But you know, we do need to be prepared because Hispanic visitors have different expectations than your classic Caucasian visitor. You know, we need to design places that are welcoming to all. And a big part of that is having a workforce that reflects the diversity of your users and your state and making sure people feel welcome.
And does that happen in Delaware?
We go out of our way to try to make it happen. I will tell you, I've sat on a lot of interview pools, and there's not enough diverse candidates to fill the positions that need to be filled. I think that's a nationwide kind of thing.
So at the Park Service, the Park Service is the whitest organization in the federal government. It's 90% white, ought to be about 67%. And we found out that we hire about 500 people a year. If we hire people of color in all 500 positions for the next 6 years, we still wouldn't have the right numbers, right? And then where are we going to find those people? Where are those people going to come from? So if the National Park Service said they were going to hire all people of color for the next 6 years, they couldn't find them because they're just not there. And I think that's part of what CORES is sort of working on.
And I think if you go to the traditional pipeline and you look at who the seasonal employees are and you look at the universities, there's not a great example
they're not
of
there
that as
either,
well.
right.
So you do have to grow them, and that's a big reason we started our Youth Conservation Corps program. And we're seeing people that hadn't thought about parks as a career. Some, we purposely hire people that don't even like parks because we want to give them a different experience. You know, an inner city kid from Wilmington spending time at Bellevue, we've seen it change lives. And you need to take that leap and that risk to really, if you keep doing the same stuff over and over again, you know what results you're going to get.
The same result, So Dan, you're at the Core Network Conference. What is it you've got to share with Core Network people relative to what your organization does?
Oh, that's loaded. Following up on what you were just talking about, though, I think both the Public Lands Alliance and CORES around the country are truly on the front lines of this move towards equity. because, well, there are a few things. Sometimes we can be a little bit more nimble than our government colleagues, whether it's in our hiring practices or how we even work with and manage people. I was really struck earlier to hear about the Rainbow Corps that was celebrated earlier in the video today. As an LGBTQ person myself, God, I wish that had been around 20 years ago when I was doing this. But I see so many corps working on how do we make sure that the people who are leading your efforts out in the field get what it means to talk about pronouns, get what it means to be ready for transgender people coming in at an early age. I think a lot of those of us within the Public Lands Alliance are doing that both at that age, at times earlier, at times later. I think about the work that so many residential learning centers are doing throughout the National Park System and other land management agencies, groups like Nature Bridge, North Cascades Institute, the work happening under the auspices of the Yellowstone Forever in Yellowstone National Park. They're wrestling with these same things, trying to figure out, well, how do you serve youth maybe far younger than your average Corps member when they're going to be in your care for a week at a time, and we want to make sure that their first experience of public lands comes with that level of embrace.
Okay, so Catherine, you have an organization that pretty much represents urban parks and recreation agencies, and my sense is there's enough work to do in urban areas for corps that we don't necessarily have to send them out to remote places.
Yeah.
When I got to the National Park Service and I talked to George McDonald about this, we fight about it all the time. My perception of this core work is it was simply cheap labor because federal agencies had a maintenance backlog and this was a cheap way to get it done. But it wasn't real youth development. And when these people went back to their neighborhoods were exactly the same as when they left them. So they're improving the environment at the places where they're going, but they're not doing anything in the places where they live. So Catherine, how do you think we could use corps to sort of improve life in urban areas? How do they serve urban parks and recreation agencies, do you think?
Well, I think there's a terrific opportunity. There are a couple of trends that we're seeing, and one is that park and recreation agencies are seeing that they can help be the solution to these broader societal challenges, particularly around community development. So whether that is about environmental justice, it's about food security, it's about transportation options, it's about incarceration reduction, community cohesion, youth development. All of these pieces are places where parks and recreation can play a significant role, and not necessarily where many of these agencies have focused in the past, but I'm seeing the agencies and their nonprofit partners begin to think differently. So I think that's one area, is that the field itself is expanding. And secondly, that many cities are now making it a priority to put into place policies that will ensure that public dollars are invested equitably throughout their cities, in all neighborhoods. And they're doing that with data-driven approaches. And so what they're looking at is, not only where do we need to have more park and rec opportunities, but where do we need to have a more robust tree canopy? Where are we seeing higher levels of flooding? Where are the health challenges the greatest? And all of these layers. And so then they'll be able to actually say, yes, we need to invest in these communities because they have so many issues. And I think, again, this opens up an incredible opportunity to corps because there are so many different types of skills that are now needed. And I think, to your point, that the traditional park and recreation field really didn't focus on many of these things, but here's this new opportunity to actually create the pipeline and the next generation of leaders.
Yeah. We found out in Raleigh that people in my neighborhood, my zip code 27610, live 13 years less than people 5 miles away in another zip code in Raleigh. I mean, it's kind of scary, 13 years less than a person in a different part of the city. And maybe all of you can kind of respond to this. What is it that CORS could do to get involved in those kinds of things? I mean, we typically look at maintenance and trails and bridges and invasives and that kind of thing. But what about the real challenges that are facing urban America? How do you see CORS as being helpful in terms of getting that work done? So let's start with Ray.
So I know in Delaware, our groups, they do the traditional kind of conservation type trail building and things. But there's a lot of interaction with youth, getting kids out. We have an event called Healthy Kids Day, where we invite every 4th grader out in the county, and they get a lesson on nutrition. Nutrition was never really seen as a parks kind of issue, but it's a great way to reach every 4th grader. And if it wasn't for the support of our Vet Corps and some of those other programs, it would be very easy for a park system just to say, we don't have the capacity. We can't handle every 4th grader. We're not going to do this kind of special event. We traditionally with bike rallies, those type of things. And it really helps parks expand their reach. And our user groups are expecting that. They're wanting that. We're also seeing the same thing happen with sustainability. People don't want to just come to a park. They want to talk about, where are the charging stations? Where's the green infrastructure? How is this park going to be influenced by sea level rise? So you got to meet people where they're at instead of, we can't do the way the National Park Service did business 30 years ago isn't going to work in 2020.
Okay. Dan, any thoughts about that?
It's amazing how physical transformations are the ones it's easiest for us to all get our
Physical transformation?
Yeah, I mean, something doesn't look like it used to. And it is remarkable the kinds of work that CORS in particular can do when brought into a situation to say, how can this urban campground be shaped differently so that the infrastructure itself becomes accessible to other communities that maybe were not there. To be able to see that, I think, begins to get at the piece that leadership has around this, where CORS make the difference. They'll be able to look back and say, yes, we physically transformed this campground. It now looks different. We might have a more accessible something here. But the process along the way of empowering youth and veterans to have made that change, to have been the ones in the community doing that, that's where some of the lasting benefits to that zip code can come in. I also see, and there's no one-size-fits-all for the nonprofits that do this kind of work that you're doing. There aren't in the Public Lands Alliance as well. But a lot of us are very locally community-based. It's in the names of our organizations. We support this state, this city, this unit of a larger national park. Not the whole national park, just this little part of it. We find our leadership of the boards, whether it's your actual governing board or your advisory ones, localized to that community. You've got a chance in the work that you do, in the transformations you make, in the leadership you impart, to also have a community support network. And I find that so incredibly valuable in working with any of our land management agencies to create change. It is so often that it is the nonprofits leading this effort that become the face of that place. The ones who have been there longer. I can't speak to the Delaware system, but how many of us have worked with a national park where the superintendent that came in has never worked at that site before, doesn't have the community relationships? They're going to do this great new GMP, back when they used to do those things. And we're going to transform how we're going to think about this place is going to be managed, but we don't actually have any on-the-ground knowledge of that. That's where CORS can play a difference. That's where nonprofits can play a difference. That's where the leaders you're building up can be able to speak up for those places.
Catherine, any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the CORS can help cities be resilient for the 21st century. And that means that they can help to transform vacant or degraded land into productive space, whether that's through urban agriculture, local farms. So there's a tremendous opportunity there to really sort of change the systems in cities. Related to that, I think that there's a lot of work actually that some corps have been involved with around brownfields transformation. Again, bringing green space and outdoor recreation opportunities to neighborhoods. And lastly, I think you mentioned the green infrastructure to really help retrofit cities.
Yes.
And I think there are new skills that are incredibly scarce, and so I think they can help cities to be prepared for, large weather events, but just the changing climate in the future.
So there's a TED Talk by a guy named Ron Finley who's called the Guerilla Gardener in Los Angeles. I don't know how many of you have seen this, but he started planting food in his median strip, and they gave him a citation because they told him he couldn't do that. But he's providing food so people can eat the food, right? But then corps start getting involved in that kind of work. They start getting involved in identifying lots and growing food in lots. So I heard a quote one time and I talked to you about this earlier today, from a futurist called Marshall McLuhan. He was real famous back in the 60s, and I got to be with him one time, and he made the statement to me. It was the 60s, so I thought maybe he was a little bit high or something because it sounded a little weird. He said, Mickey, in the future, flowers will only grow in the spaces between the disciplines, not in the disciplines themselves. And I had to try to figure out what the hell is he talking about, right? But what he's saying is that you can't solve systemic problems with single disciplinary solutions. In other words, it takes absolute collaboration with people who have missions that intersect with yours, with people who have interests. What's your experience with that whole issue about creating collaborations and not simply being self-reliant on solving these complicated problems?
I'll start with that one. So the role of our park superintendents is totally different than it was 30 years ago. It used to be we hired people that were control, access. This is my domain and I'm responsible for it all. We're basically, we need people that are partnership builders, collaborators. A park like Cape Henlopen, you're dealing with 7 different concessionaire, 15 different friends groups, and a variety of different community partners. And you're not in control of the partnership. And that's really tough for someone through our traditional park service model, where we're proud of how many keys we have, because that's control in our world. And that's the changing world that we're in, especially if you're a community-connected park. People are in your park every day. Some of them are there more than the people that work there because they love those parks and they move to that area, or we have volunteers that every Thursday and Friday show up wanting to do historic restoration. These are people from all different backgrounds, and it's harder to manage those people than it is your community service worker, because you can't just say, yeah, go do this. They want to know the why, and they want to make sure they're adding value. So even managing volunteers has changed in a dramatic way.
And how about collaboration with you? How do you see people in the spaces between the disciplines as opposed to working on single disciplinary things?
Few things. One, I think we all know that not just one piece of the pie is ever growing. Sometimes some are shrinking. I was really moved by the panel earlier today talking about the ways in which we can get this next generation to come and join the federal land management agencies. But we also know that this is a day where the president's budget came out and they're looking to reduce the number of full-time National Park Service employees by over 900. Now, we know those budgets don't get enacted exactly the way they're written or anything, but if that's a mindset going in of one of the things that you've got to contend with, we're going to need shared stewardship to get anything done, because it's not going to be able to be contained within the land management agencies. But to address your question, I'm reminded in the way you framed it by a massive effort the last few years called One TAM. It's in Marin County in California. It's a space that has state park land, the Golden Gate National Recreation Area. It's got water districts, port authorities, and I believe they've got at least 7 different government agencies, at least 3 or 4 major nonprofits, and it's the Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy, the Friends group of the park, that is helping to convene an effort for years to try to create one TAM, an interconnected series of ways in which we engage anyone visiting this landscape of Marin County. And it doesn't matter who owns what, but we've got to be accessible to all. And how can we make sure our signage, our entrance fees, our ways of helping to divert traffic and waste can all come together in a way that makes this place sustainable, and no one of those entities could ever do it on their own. And it is a nonprofit that is helping to convene that larger exercise, including an interagency one.
And we're seeing things across the country where individual organizations could not do something, but with the collaboration of the organizations, they could do it. No one organization could accomplish it alone. They could only accomplish it if they were together. So Catherine, how do you see this issue around collaboration?
Yeah, we've actually been leading a series of workshops around the country on this exact topic. You know, the challenges before us are immense. They're complex, and they can't be solved by a single entity. And you know, the good news is that there's a lot of research now, and people are seeing that you know, there are nature-based solutions to addressing a whole host of challenges, but it does bring in a range of partners. And I think that there's, as part of this next generation, I think that they're collaborative by nature, and I think that bodes well for us because, you know, as I say, the challenges that we have to face really are going to require us to think outside of our own, you know, small world, and really understand how we work together in broader systems.
Okay. When I worked in innovation in Seattle, we would periodically just bring disparate groups together and sit them down together, and invariably they would start solving problems. They would start solving each other's problems. The greatest example was when the people who pick up trash decided they could pick up library books for people in the library. If people don't want to go to the library, we'll pick up your library books, all right? So here the three of you are up here. Based on what we've talked about now, how would you guys collaborate to address some of the challenge that we're facing? You've got a nonprofit that deals with friend groups. You've got an organization that's trying to get stuff done. You're dealing with local parks and recreation agencies. What do you see as I'm making this up now, right? What would you see as the synergy between the three of you to help address the problems that we've got?
Wow, put us on the spot, why don't you?
Anybody can start if you're not ready.
I'm going to totally dodge this. And I'm instead going to pivot a little to, an area where I think there is some energy and some excitement around. We have recently been engaging at a national level to partner with others around where can we reduce the waste coming out of our parks that gets into landfills, that becomes, you know, problems to our environmental footprints. It's about bringing together concessioners in these places. It's bringing about the land management agencies. It's partnering with municipalities to figure out what your waste stream issues are. It's bringing in leading nonprofits from across the country, everything from Recycle America to the Leave No Trace Center for Ethics, to try to see where there are both opportunities for infrastructure and education. Because it's one thing to change the physical environment, it's another to actually make it useful and successful because people think differently and engage with the infrastructure differently. I think for all of us, there are different ways. You pick the issue: equity, climate change, waste reduction. We are all engaged in these many different multiple kinds of arrangements. Where it gets most interesting and most powerful, I think, though, is when everybody's willing to first come in and say, I'm not sure I know how to solve this yet, but here are some of the resources I have available. And sometimes those resources are just helping to make a connection between other parties that never would have existed otherwise, because the knowledge is out there. We don't always have the networks or the mechanisms to share them among one another.
Okay, great.
I think definitely engagement is key. And being Delaware, we're small, less than 1 million people. People joke about the Kevin Bacon, like everyone was 7 degrees. It's probably a degree and a half in Delaware, to be honest with you. I think our challenge is it's easier to make those connections, and I've seen it. One person can make a huge impact. So knowing what opportunities are out there, we're working hard to involve our business community in our parks. We have all these historic barns and mansions, and we can't help take care of them. You know, we have more properties on or eligible on the National Register than any other entity in our state, which is unusual for a state park system. But right now, barn weddings are one of the most popular things you can do. And we found ways to connect with the business community that can offer something. I don't want my staff offering a wedding, but I'd love to partner with someone. And the resources that come from that wedding venture, I'm able to put back into things that aren't profitable, environmental education, youth corps, those type of things. So we're definitely a partnership park system. We sat down once and tried to count. On any given day, you can catch one of the largest tunas, you can get married, you can tee off, you can do swimming, and none of those are being done by a Delaware State Parks employee. You know, our job is to focus on the core things. We're the only ones that can be the rangers. We're the only ones we want to be the educators. But there's a vast network of stuff where we can bring partners in, whether they're concessionaires, or they're friends groups, race organizers. It's just making yourself open and having a different model.
I think an exciting possibility would be around regional biodiversity. You know, the cities have the people, and you know, they can monitor what's going on. I think the state parks have the experience and the knowledge of working with, you know, working on conservation issues that many of the city parks departments don't have. And I think the federal lands, the federal governments have great research. And so I think there's an interesting opportunity there.
Yeah. When I was working in the state of Washington, we identified that the 4 major parks and recreation agencies, King County, Seattle, Washington State National Park Service, were all spending about $25,000 on equity work and all doing a horrible job. All doing a horrible job. But when they came together to combine the $25,000 to do the work together, so when the National Park Service and state parks and local parks and county parks pooled their money and did equity work together, the work was way more effective. It was interesting because cities have kids, right? National Park Service don't have no kids.
Right.
They're not community organizers, but this whole issue about collaboration becomes really important. I think are we out of time? I'm sorry. But I want to thank the panelists for coming and sharing their experience. We don't have any time for questions or anything. Okay, thank you.